It was in the winter time because it got dark early and it was extremely cold. My mother and father had gone out with my brother and sister, and that's when it all began.
I knew what it was immediately, and in fact the way it showed itself was quite odd. This came up from behind the tree, so it actually raised itself and then flew towards me.
My ears went all blocked, as if like when you're coming into land on an aeroplane. And as soon as I stood up, I saw this massive object in front of me.
We were coming into Grand Canyon and getting near to Area 51. We saw this black spot on the horizon, and then it came at us. We pushed like mad, and it went over the top.
When we look at UFO sightings in general, there are so many different objects, craft, call them what you will, that have been witnessed around the world. It's one of the perplexing things about this subject.
This has been going on since the dawn of time. It's always been with us, and now more and more people are coming forward and speaking out about it.
I just want to find out the truth. I'm not frightened anymore.
I tend to think that we were taken. We had those vague memories of laying on the table.
White faces, darker eyes, and they were wearing white.
We took it to the US Navy, and sorry, no comment, no comment.
I'm sure there are people just like me who are driven mad from not knowing.
I'm fairly sure I know what's going on, and I now just hope I live long enough to see some of this come to fruition and everybody knows what I know.
You ready, Tony?
Yes, I'm ready. Where would you like me to start? I was actually born in the village here, Littleport, and 1954 I was born. The area that I live used to be a few hundred years ago, basically a few pockets of islands sticking out of a marshland. It was a very creepy place in those days, and most people from outside the fens wouldn't ever travel to the fens. They heard there was monsters and all sorts in the mires and boglands around here. It's very flat. It's very much like some parts of America. Those days were quite hazy to me now, those younger days. Now every day seems to go so fast, and in those days seem stretched out, and it was one nice day after another, playing with my mates and doing all the stuff kids do, and it was fantastic. It was in the winter time because it got dark early and it was extremely cold. So I was just fooling around in the house, playing records and just generally doing nothing, watching a bit of television. And in the evening time, my mother and father went out with my brother and sister, and that's when it all began. Well, this is where I used to live in the 1970s. I spent most of my youth here. Over here where these modern houses are, all the way back down here, and indeed this bungalow here, none of those existed at the time. This was an open view to the fens in the distance. So when my mother and father went out, I had strict instructions not to allow the fire to go out because it heated the central heating, and they wanted a warm bungalow to come home to, I guess. I don't know what time it was, but I know I'd fell asleep on the settee, and I woke up in a bit of a shock because I all of a sudden realised that the fire may be gone out. There was some red cinders in the bottom of the fire, so I thought if I go and get some fresh coal, and I put just a few bits on, it will fire all off again. So I rushed out with what we call the coal scuttle in those days, and I bent down to put the coal into the chute. My ears went all blocked, as if like when you're coming into land on an aeroplane. And the other side of the bungalow was quite a busy road, and I could hear no traffic whatsoever. It was almost like I was in my own little bubble. I felt a strange sensation all over my body, my arms, my neck, all my hairs seemed to be electrically charged. I stood up to clear my ears. The dog barked and ran away, and then, just then, over here, behind me, I saw this huge craft. I didn't know what it was. I was mesmerised by the thing. It was perhaps a cone shaped, an ice cream cone shape. And the colour, I always described it as a dirty gold. It looked like it was spinning, but it may not have been. There was no sound. I didn't smell anything. In actual fact, you wouldn't know it was there unless you was looking at it. And I looked at it for what seemed like, forever really, but in actual fact was probably only a few seconds. It was up there, and in a flash, it went straight up into the sky at a stupidly fast speed, and when it became the size of a star, it then shot off diagonally until it disappeared, basically. So this used to be the kitchen in those days. When my parents arrived, which was, I don't know, probably 11 o'clock at night, something like that, I told them what I'd seen, and I think it was out of their comfort zone and out of their, they just weren't geared up for stuff like that, and they just said, and I said, what do you think it was? My father said, well, I think it was just one of those things. I've actually approached them in more recent years and asked if they remember me telling them, and neither of them remember me telling them, which is quite convenient, I guess. They don't have to approach the subject anymore.
I think if you were sceptical enough, with this particular incident and this object that looked like an ice cream cone, you could say, well, he's just woke up, it's still, he's having a waking dream, he hasn't fully, come around. That's, an easy explanation, so to speak. Doesn't mean it's right, of course. We go back to 1973 and we look at popular culture that covers UFO, spaceships, aliens, things like Doctor Who and a few movies. None of them have anything like this in it.
After my experience with this UFO, my life changed initially a great deal because I couldn't make out what I saw, and I wanted to know. In the early days, there was very little information out there. You could go to the local library and get books. I found in the back of the books they had an advert for a magazine called Flying Saucer Review, but they were excellent at the time because they told me lots of what I didn't know, and that's what I was after. And over the years, I've spent an awful amount of time researching all this. And as time's gone on, it's become more and more of an obsession. Then comes along the internet, and not only am I not alone, it's been going on for thousands of years. It's happening to so many people, and that's without the ones that are maybe too afraid to come forward. So I find it helps me knowing what I've seen with all these other people that have seen these, that I'm not alone, whereas in the first few years, it was lonely.
The introduction of Freedom of Information Acts and the rise of the internet have played a huge part when it comes to UFOs. What this has done is it's placed a vast amount of information into the public domain. The Ministry of Defence, for example, in the UK has declassified and released about 60,000 pages of UFO documentation. And what this enables people to do is research not only their own sightings, but also other sightings that might tie in with what they saw and experienced. So these witnesses, whether they're reporting UFO sightings or alien abductions, there's no single neat answer for this. You could say that some UFO sightings are attributable to military activity. You could say that others are attributable to astronomical phenomena. But there isn't a single answer that will explain every single case. The official position of the UK and US government is along the lines of, we remain open-minded about the phenomenon, and in the US at least, we are actively investigating and researching the phenomenon. But to date, there has been no definitive evidence, let alone proof, that any of this is extraterrestrial.
This is my office, my little den where I spend a good part of my life. This one, the CIA folder here, is one that I've been working on recently. There's some disclosed documents by the CIA and the FBI. Some of these are fairly old though. And these documents, they all refer to the UFOs as if they're an everyday occurrence, but officially they say they don't exist.
When people look at some of these declassified documents, inevitably the eye is drawn to the censor's pen, where somebody has taken a big black marker and struck through parts of the document. Now, many times this is not quite as sinister as it might seem. Very often, for example, that's simply the names, addresses, and personal information of the witnesses, removed for data protection purposes. On other occasions, it covers things like methods and sources of gathering intelligence, or it may cover information that would disclose the capability of military systems. Though I have to say, I've seen over classification when it comes to UFOs, a sort of sensitivity that I think derives from an embarrassment about the fact that there are things in our airspace running rings around our best fighter aircraft, and we often don't have a clue what they are.
When it comes to our own government, our own Ministry of Defence, they've quoted time and time again that they are only interested in the UFO subject or UFO sightings if it's a threat to the defence of the United Kingdom. And as to date, that has never been the case. Therefore, they're not interested.
Just like this on the morning, a blue sky and just the odd bits of broken cloud. This is my flight simulator, where I can relive my thousands of miles of flying, which is about the one thing that keeps me sane as a very old grounded pilot. But it's a super thing to have, especially now, of course, the scenery is photographic. So it really is like flying real time. So as my wife will tell you, I sometimes get lost in here about 3.5 hours retracing my flights, especially my long-haul flights in America. I can retrace all of them, except I can't produce a UFO on the flight sim. I was born in Norwich, 20th of February 1932. It wasn't until 64 that I find I could afford to learn, and I've had 40 super years of flying ever since. I've flown 58 different types of aeroplanes, learnt on Tiger Moths and rallies. I was lucky, I joined the 1,000 mile an hour club flying in the Lightning. I was a demonstration pilot for 4 years doing air shows. And of course, I suppose that one I mustn't forget is my favourite aircraft really in America, the Cessna 337, because that's a very lovely aeroplane to fly, super aeroplane. But that was how this started. When I started to work in America, when we met our UFO, this was on our first long haul. We were coming out of New York all the way across America and into Grand Canyon, and then there and then home back up to San Francisco. It must have been about 11 o'clock in the morning. We'd got to about 11,000 feet. We'd leveled off, we'd settled back. We were entering the Mojave Desert, which we knew was one had to exactly fly the airway because you had all sorts of restricted areas on both sides of you. In fact, you're getting near to the famous Area 51. This was the airway. We were coming out of Grand Canyon Airport along here, and as you can see, your airway then is restricted because of these military areas here.
Given the proximity to Area 51, it's possible that these witnesses saw some sort of secret prototype aircraft. One can look at the history of Area 51 and say that this is where the United States developed and flew some of the really iconic, cutting-edge reconnaissance aircraft and sometimes fighters and bombers that we know about now, but which were kept secret for years and years.
That is the 337, and I was flying in the left-hand seat there. Air traffic were following us on radar, which we always ask for radar following in America, and they just confirmed that we had no conflicting traffic at our altitude. So I suppose we were sitting relaxed when suddenly we both saw in front of us this tiny black spot on the horizon at the same height, but it suddenly grew and grew so quick, and then it came at us. We pushed like mad, and it went over the top. So we said, what the hell was that? We debated whether we should tell the regional air traffic, but we both thought, having just heard from them that we had no conflicting, if we suddenly went back and said, hang on, there's something, they could well think those two old pilots are seeing things, so we didn't.
There is stigma when it comes to pilots seeing and reporting UFOs. It's lessening, but that's a fairly recent phenomenon, and it's still there. But back in the 80s and the 90s, when I was doing the job at the MOD, it was a huge deal. And I spoke to numerous pilots who had seen UFOs, but who had not dared make a report, either because they were worried about ridicule and disbelief, but more worryingly for these people, often they were concerned that there would be adverse career consequences. At worst, psychological evaluation, being grounded, effectively losing your wings, so to speak.
Canyon Tower, Cessna, November 20096 at runway 3.
On the whole of the flight back from New York back to San Francisco, we were under radar control all the time, which was great. Air traffic in America is very good. If they'd have seen something, they would have warned us immediately, or possibly if they'd seen it, they might have come back to us afterwards and asked us if we'd seen something. But no, they didn't. Nobody came back at all. But then, funny enough, about a minute, I suppose, after it had gone over the top, we both had this weird feeling that there was something out to port. You couldn't register on something, and yet we both sensed that we could see something moving. So I said to David, well, you fly and I'll get my camera, and took 2 pictures, and that was it. And then after that, the feeling that something was there went. In fact, I was about to say something, as I say, and David said to me, it's gone, it's gone. Ah, here they are. There are the ones. As soon as we landed in San Francisco, we took the film into the camera shop, 1-hour camera shop, and when they developed and printed it, we couldn't believe it, because there on one picture was nothing except the wing and the mountains, and the second one, there was the same picture, the wing and the mountains, and our UFO. So an amazing experience for a pilot to actually see and then photograph it. Whether it was having a look at and trying to work out as to what we were, it could be. He was interested in us as we were interested in him. We took it to a great friend in the US Navy and showed him the pictures, and he asked if he could keep them for a few days, and I said yes, as long as I can have them back before I go home. But when we came to pick them up from him, we were puzzled, because we'd known him for years and years and years, and all we could get out of him was no comment, no comment, no comment. And no matter how hard David and I pressed him, saying, Bill, come on, you must know what it is, he would always say, sorry, no comment, no comment. So we both came away feeling that he knew a lot more than he was letting on.
When you look at it, there's nothing obvious springs to mind what this thing may or may not be. However, we cannot rule out the fact that they were near to what is probably the most secret military installation in the world, i.e. Area 51. Therefore, there's a very good reason why you shouldn't be saying anything. It was a test, it went astray, it broke this rule, it broke that, regulation. That's why, no one was prepared to comment on it.
I think he'd obviously been told that he wasn't to say anything about it.
To get this no comment, no comment, that's interesting. It would be the easiest thing in the world to say, yeah, we took a look at it, we don't know. Or turns out it's just a trick of the light or a fault with the camera or something. But that didn't happen. When you look at this photo, which is so illustrative of the vast speed of this object, I'm immediately put in mind of those US Navy videos that were released recently, the gimbal, the go fast, the tic tac, even down to the sort of indistinct shape of this particular object, even down to the blurriness that surrounds at least one of those images. And isn't it interesting that the witness gave this to a contact who just happened to be in the US Navy?
Did you box moving target? No, I took an auto track. Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at it fly. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. Look at that thing. It's rotating.
It's worth saying that the US Navy did issue a formal press release saying these 3 videos are official US Navy videos and the phenomenon shown in them remains unidentified.
I have a feeling the governments will never come out and say, by the way, aliens have been visiting us through most of our man's history here. I don't think that's going to happen. But I think somewhere along the line they said, the world is going to have to know about this. And I think very slowly they've been building it up, leading us down to a soft disclosure. By that I mean they just keep putting out little bits of information, so there will become a time when everybody knows anyway, it's all accepted. And I think in the near future everybody will know at least some of it is real.
November 75152.
You've got a lot of people who don't believe it, but of course there's evidence now that there are UFOs. So I think most people are beginning to realize now that possibly, there is something in it.
After I had my sighting in the early 70s, I had a couple of weeks telling everybody I knew because I was fascinated and totally took up with this object that I saw. But I soon realized it was a bad move because I had probably around 2 years regretting telling anybody. The response I got from family, friends was quite appalling. It was laughter, name calling and all sorts, and it hurt quite a bit, but I knew what I'd seen. It was something that wasn't of this world. I have a feeling it had a negative effect on my marriage. Sometimes it took over my life. I would get up in the morning early, in more recent years go on the computer researching stuff or reading books. Then I'd go and do a day's work. I would then be on the computer until midnight, so my wife sometimes would never see me, and I don't think that helped at all. I don't know why the interest seemed to start escalating, but it did. It got so bad it was almost like a compulsion, really. But this is going to sound ridiculous what I now say, but it was very similar to the characters in the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, trying to build these models of this mountain he's seen. And I wouldn't say it was as bad as that, but there was a compulsion. And yeah, it just slowly took over my life.
When people have these encounters, experiences, whatever you would like to call them, it's down to the individual how they react afterwards. For some, it is indeed life-changing. Some look at it in a very positive fashion, some in quite a negative fashion, and some it doesn't bother at all one way or the other. It's like any traumatic experience. We all deal with it differently thereafter.
Well, this is the model of my UFO, the craft that I saw. I've basically covered it all with some fine surface filler, and I'm just going around rubbing the filler down now prior to paint. Well, the colours on here are going to be a combination of bright and darker golds. There's going to be bronze and a touch of copper as well. So I'm just hoping I can get the right effect with it all. But yeah, it's a model of my UFO and an accurate representation of it as well, to the best of my memory anyway. My son bought me this book. It's part of the Haunted Skies series, and these are all UFOs seen in the UK. And I was flipping through it and stopped and saw this UFO, and I pulled my son over and I said, "It's my UFO." He said, "Was your UFO a bit like that, was it?" I said, "No, that is the UFO." And if I can find the page here, I've got it marked off for reference here somewhere. Here we go. And I know you can't see it very good on there, but it's got the bobbles underneath and the big bobble in the middle. It's got the little windows, but that shows it up the other way up to how I saw it. I saw it that way up, but I'm sure you'll agree that's the same thing really. And they're the only two times I've seen this shape, my own sighting and this one in the book. The time I saw the craft was 73, and it was many years after when I actually saw this picture in the book, and this was around 2015, so there's many years gone. Although the sighting of this craft in the book was from only 3 years after I saw my UFO. I'm not ashamed to say it brought almost a tear to my eye. Well, it did bring a tear to my eye because, you know, for the first time in all those years, I saw something that was what I saw and somebody else has seen it.
I only tell people that I think I trust enough not to jump up and down. I've mentioned to 1 or 2 relatives. Some of them go, "Wow, that's really interesting," and some of them go, "Are you nuts?" And that's the problem. But I'm sure there are people just like me who are driven mad from not knowing, and you just have to find out. I was born somewhere around the mid-50s in London, and I wasn't into UFOs. I was just an ordinary person like everyone else. And I went to bed one night and I just couldn't sleep. I was tossing and turning. I didn't know whether to get up or stay in bed. Well, eventually I got up. I came downstairs, made a cup of tea, got a cigarette, opened the French doors to go in the back garden, and just as I was about to light my cigarette, I noticed a glowing yellowish orb at the back of the field, which is on the back of my house. It's probably about 400 yards long, and there's trees at the end of it. And this thing was kind of almost behind the tree. And while I watched it, it rose up, came across the top of the tree, across the field towards me, and over my next door neighbour's house. In fact, it was so close to his house, it could have almost knocked his chimney stack off. It was just maybe a couple of feet above. And it didn't make a sound. It was totally silent. And I could tell it was a solid object because there seemed to be some kind of reflection near the top of this orb. And I was just totally amazed.
When people see orbs or spherical objects of any sort in this particular subject, there are, as is often the case, a number of possibilities here. It could be ball lightning, it could be a Chinese lantern, it could be some bright light reflecting off a very low, unusual cloud formations that you sometimes get. I mean, literally, some of the lenticular clouds look like huge UFOs. And of course, it could be something genuinely anomalous. The Pentagon has talked about how some UFOs do take a spherical form, and there's footage of at least one of these things flying over an undisclosed location in the Middle East. So there's a lot going on in our skies, and we don't necessarily have a handle on all of it. And atmospheric physicists, meteorologists, other scientists will debate this.
I knew what it was immediately, and in fact the way it showed itself was quite odd. I doubt that you can say it was hiding, but it came up from behind the tree, so it actually raised itself and then flew towards me. And because it was glowing a faint yellowy light, obviously it stood out in the night, and that's what caught my eye. It was a constant speed in a constant direction. I don't know whether I've been absolutely lucky or it's a case of being in the right place at the right time, but I don't know. Life's a mystery. You ask questions, you don't always get the answers, but sometimes you get something that gnaws away at you. You've just got to find out. It becomes a personal quest.
This is a global phenomenon, and allied with that, there is a perception in the UFO community that the authorities know more about this than they're letting on. The Ministry of Defense has files relating to UFO sightings, actually going back as far as the Second World War. But it was 1953 when we set up a formally constituted research and investigation effort. When I was doing that job, it wasn't a secret that we had a UFO program. On the other hand, we didn't exactly broadcast it either. There is that reluctance to admit that there might be things in your airspace that you can't identify. And I think the other reason for playing down our interest is perhaps a little bit of sensitivity that maybe some people would think, well, is this a particularly good use of taxpayers' money? Some members of parliament, for example, might have made political capital out of this, and we didn't ever want it to become a party political issue, not least because civil servants, of course, must be politically neutral. But the bread and butter of the job was always the cases themselves, and we got about 200 or 300 a year during my particular posting to the UFO desk. So I certainly came out of that job much less skeptical than when I went in. But that said, I had not and still have not found a smoking gun that says any of this is extraterrestrial.
I know it's an obsession, and I guess the main reason I want to do it is for myself. I want to know before I go what I saw was what I saw, if you know what I mean. And it's only after getting more deeper involved with the UFO scene as such and learning an awful amount more about the phenomenon, I realised that there's a good chance that I went up. So I decided to have some hypnotic regression to see if there was anything there.
Regression hypnosis is something that is found in a number of alien abduction investigations. Essentially, you will go into this very relaxed state and you will be asked, hopefully, non-leading questions to see if you can recall details that you have forgotten or which have been somehow wiped from your mind by some unknown process. Now, this is controversial because while its proponents believe it can play a legitimate role in helping people remember things that they've forgotten, others say that you can actually, through the power of suggestion, implant false memories.
So I came back to that day and I was thinking what was going on, and I remembered it was like a light coming down. I went up, I could feel the cool wind, and I didn't seem to go through a door. 1 minute I was just seemed to be going up. I could see all the bungalow below me, and the next second I was in this massive round dome-shaped room, and the walls were all white, but they seemed to have a film over them, a little bit like oil on water, and it was all moving around. But there was also a mist in some area, and I could see these small grey creatures about 3 feet high, big almond-shaped eyes, black eyes, very little nose, just two holes, holes for ears, and the smallest mouth you've ever seen. Really long arms with 4 fingers, and the fingers had like bubbles on the end, almost like little balls on the end of them. And they seemed to be coming towards me, and I did have a little bit of apprehension at that point, because until then I was finding it quite amazing, really, and I wasn't that scared. And at that moment, my eye line in my regression moved to the left, and I could see this really tall Scandinavian type guy, and he had really long blonde hair, past the shoulder length blonde hair, and the most vivid blue eyes. It was almost like they were lit up.
People call them Nordics because they look like the typical blonde Scandinavian person. What some people have speculated is that some of these human-looking creatures seem to be in command. They're the boss, they're the doctors, and that the other ones, you know, the grey-looking creatures or the funny-looking creatures, they're the kind of drones. They're the ones doing the legwork. It's not with every case, but it is a reoccurring theme, for want of a better phrase.
The next thing I remember is being down, putting the coal into the coal chute. I don't recall much more. I only had the 2 sessions, and perhaps I should go back. So what I now think happened is, when lots of people see these UFOs, they're either being picked up or being dropped off, or both. It seems like they almost uncloak, if you like, for want of a better word, and that you see them just for that moment when you're taken up.
If we are dealing with extraterrestrial visitation, a civilization with the understanding of science and with the associated technological and engineering ability to travel between the stars, it's hardly inconceivable that they've figured out how to make something invisible.
When I was 17, if I knew what I know now, I would have a little bit of a fight going on in my head. One hand would be saying, don't tell anybody, just forget this ever happened. Or I would perhaps do the exact opposite. I wish I'd spent more time on it. About 14 years ago, they found a tumour on my lungs, well, several in actual fact, and it's all being kept under control at the moment by drugs, like a chemo drug. But it's okay, I still get around and do stuff, but obviously one day that'll stop working and there isn't much else to do after that. I guess the drive I have to keep me going down this road is the fact that I want to know what's going on before I go. I've done the research, I'm fairly sure I know what's going on, and I now just hope I live long enough to see some of this come to fruition and everybody knows what I know. Through building the website, building the discussion group, presenting talks all about UFOs, talking on radio and TV all about this subject, I feel I've done my bit now. I don't want to believe because I know. What I want to try and do is give as much information out there so people can make informed decisions on their own.
I think this phenomenon is vitally important, whichever way you want to look at it. If we are being visited by beings from another world, I mean, how amazing would that be? Alternatively, if we're dealing with some kind of natural force that's here as part and parcel of the earth, that's, you know, how important could that be? It could be a potential free source of energy, for example. Even if you're skeptical and say these people are having hallucinations or this or that, well, surely that should be of interest to the psychological and psychiatric fraternity. What could they learn from that? You know, so whichever way you want to look at it, I think the more information that's made public, the better.
I think people underestimate the transformative nature of these experiences, whether it's seeing a UFO or particularly if you have encountered entities. I mean, it does change your worldview. All three of these people saw something very unusual up close and personal. These are quite literally close encounters.
So at this point in time, things were a lot different in the UFO field than what they used to be. 30, 40 years ago, it was very fringy, and now it's very acceptable. And I would like to think that I've been a small part of making that so. Slowly, the governments are releasing more and more information on this subject, and we've got a long way to go, but I think we're making moves in the right direction at this moment.
The thinking used to be that we were the only living species in the entire universe, and I think that's highly improbable. There are billions and billions of stars out there, so no, I don't think there's just one species.
I can't speak for really all pilots, but certainly all the ones I fly with all have the same thing, that, yeah, we can't be the only ones that happen to, you know, use the sky and the earth possibly. But never had any more UFOs, never had anything like that at all. It was quite unique as far as I was concerned.
I often wonder just how much life there must be out there, and if it is, it starts to demonstrate how insignificant we really are. The truth is, I would like to see another one, but I doubt it's going to happen.